Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to replace the intake gaskets on this engine. And just a brief history, if you haven't been watching the channel, I had this engine rebuilt by a machine shop up in English, Florida. And I paid the guy to put the engine back together because that way I told him that way if there's any issues, it's not my fault, you know. And ever since I got it back, I've been chasing a miss in this engine. And I pretty much narrowed it down. First, I thought it was an ignition issue because it had the older style distributor on it. There was a points distributor, but someone converted over to the Petronix electronic ignition module in the distributor. Still had the external coil. So I thought that might be the issue. So I bought a brand new HEI distributor with the tack drive, mechanical track drive on it. New plug wires, hotter plugs. I put them in. It starts like a brand new car now, fires right up, but it still has that weird miss. And everything that I can see, it's indicating that I've got a vacuum leak on the intake manifold. I squirted carburetor cleaner along the top around the outside of the intake while it was running. It didn't change the RPM of the engine, so it's not leaking from above, so I'm thinking it's leaking from below. There's a few things you can do to check that. Unfortunately, I've got the plugs pulled out of the car and everything, so I'm not going to do that. I'm 99% sure it's my gaskets, so I'm going to pull them out and see what they look like. And then also, while I have it out, I want to check the flatness of the surfaces on the intake and on the head where the two made up and make sure that there's not something warped there that could cause them to leak. That's kind of rare, especially when you got cast iron heads and intake. Sometimes aluminum ones with the heat, and over time they'll distort a little bit, but these should be pretty flat. What I did first is I had to drain some of the antifreeze out to get it down below the height of the intake, because there's antifreeze going between the intake. You can see the thermostat housing and the heater hoses on the top of it, so it's got coolant in it. So I drained it down. I'm pretty sure I got it down below the height of that intake. So hopefully I won't have too much coolant running out of this when I disconnect everything. So anyway, I got the hose clamp off that. I was going to pull that off, and so let's get started on this. Okay. Just put that up out of the way. And I just put this carburetor on this car. Today's Thursday. I put it on Tuesday afternoon. I got it from my good friend Lewis, and it made a difference in the performance of the car, but I still have that weird miss, and it's on the far bank over there, and I'm thinking it's probably the between the 4 and 6 cylinder is where I'm thinking it might be leaking, because looking at the plugs and how they're not, they don't appear to be getting fuel to them. So anyway, I take the carburetor off. I need to index the distributor around to where it points to #1 cylinder. So when I pull it out, when I put it back in, I don't lose my timing. That's real critical. It saves you a lot of headaches. So you want to be sure and do that before you pull it out. Turn it around to #1 cylinder. I was hoping I could pull this distributor cap off without having to take the plug wires off, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I'm going to mark them so I put them back in the right spot. Okay, we got all the bolts out now. Let's see if we can pop this thing up a little bit. This is why I really wish I would have put the engine together myself. Okay. Well, I'm not impressed with the gasket they use. It's just a cheap old paper gasket that nobody uses anymore. This is a gasket set I bought. It's Felpro. I got it at O'Reilly's. That's a part number. And you can see, I'll get the gaskets out, but they're a very heavy composite material, and then they've got a ring right around each opening that's a little thicker, so when you tighten it down, it definitely seals around each one. This is, look at this stuff. I wouldn't use this to seal my thermostat housing. Look how thin that is. It's just a single piece of old black gasket material. I mean, that gasket should have came off in one piece. Look at that. It's all torn and ripped. I guarantee you that wasn't sealing there. Look at that. Okay. Yeah, he's got all kinds of freaking silicone around all this and stuff. You don't need all that. If you use the right gaskets, you shouldn't use any silicone. The only way you should use silicone is on each end here. And he didn't even put the rubber gaskets in here. He just filled it with silicone. But they come with a rubber gasket that goes in here, and you just put some silicone right at each end of it where the composite intake gasket meets this rubber gasket for what they call the China walls. You know, it's kind of like the Great Wall of China on each end. So I think that's probably my problem. I guarantee you those heads were probably not sitting correctly because of the gasket material and not seating properly. So I was getting some leak by. So I'm gonna take my gasket scraper and clean all this crap off, and and then I'll check it with a straight edge, make sure that my heads aren't warped or got low spots in them or anything. I gotta be real careful back here. This is for my oil pressure gauge. So let me get a scraper and we'll get this stuff cleaned up. Oh, boy, he did that. It just blows my mind. Anyway, this is a better view of the Felpro gaskets. You can kind of see they have a little lip, you know, around all the openings, so it gives you that extra little bit more of crimp right there to seal it off. So, and this gasket set I got at O'Reilly's, it was $25 and change. Again, you can see, I don't think this was the right way to go. I really don't. I think it was tightening down on things before the gasket was tightening down. I'll get these new gaskets on here, and this thing will run like new. So I've got my gasket scraper like this, and then I also have one with a razor blade on it. So I'm going to go ahead and scrape these off, and we'll get back once I get ready to put this back together. Okay, I've got all the surfaces cleaned up now. I went over them with lacquer thinner. I also ran a tap in all the 3/8 holes. I'm going to use brand new bolts, and right now we're putting the China wall gaskets on. I'm putting just enough RTV to kind of hold it in place while it sets up. It should seal on its own without anything else. And there's little tabs on the back of the gasket. There's holes in the China walls that kind of locate them and keep them from moving around on you while you're installing the intake. The intake's kind of heavy. It's cast iron. This is a stock Chevy intake. Now, on intake gaskets, there's a port here in the center. It's a heat riser port. Some of them require a little restrictor plate to go in there. For my particular year, it's saying I don't need the restrictor plate. And then it's also stamped this side up. So the little raised lips go up towards the intake. Now, they recommend, they kind of sit down those little notches. I don't know if you can see that in the in those rubber gaskets. That holds them pretty good in place. They say you can put a few spots of silicone or something to hold them in place while you're trying to mount these, but I think that's going to hold them good enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit more silicone right where those gaskets go down into that rubber. That'll help keep that from leaking right at that point. That's the only place where you might have a little bit of oil leaking if you don't put a little bit of RTV on that. And there's a little recess for that gas to go down. I usually try to fill that recess. And that's usually enough RTV to hold the gasket in place. Okay, that looks pretty good. They're centered with the intake. The fun part is getting that intake down in there without messing up the gaskets. Okay, that looks pretty good. There. Okay, now I'll go get the intake. This intake weighs about 5,000 pounds, so it's kind of hard to get, especially on a Corvette, to get it in there without moving your gaskets around a little bit. Okay, those look pretty good on that side. Okay, that looks really good. Most of these holes go into the lifter galley, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to put, this is anaerobic gasket maker. It's a Permatex product. There's the part number. Works really good. It also it works like a silicone, but it also works like a Loctite too. So it kind of helps lock the screws plus seal them, keep them from any oil wicking up on the bolts. Okay. There we go, or the intake bolt's all torqued down, so let me get the camera reset and we'll start putting the carburetor stuff back on it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is put the distributor back in, and what I got to do is I need to line this little mark up with a mark here, and then this needs to end up right there when it's all the way back down again. So I think if I set it right about there and drop it in, that's pretty close. I got to go one more tooth, I think. There we go. Yeah, perfect. That was easy. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down now, because that should be what I'm going to have to do. Is it didn't quite hit on the oil pickup drive shaft, so I'll just jog the button just a little bit on the car, and it'll rotate the engine, and that you'll see that drop down when it drops down on there. It's still maintaining the timing because it's locked into the gear on the camshaft, so it just needs to drop down now. So I'm going to have to kind of jog it. See how it dropped? So I maintained my timing because it was turning with the motor, and then when it got around to where it lined up with the lower oil drive shaft on the oil pump, it dropped down on it. So. Two. Like that. Could be a little bit. Don't force it, get a bigger hammer. Hello everyone, sorry the video ended the way it did. I didn't realize at the time that my cameras were overheating and that they stopped working when I went to finish up the video. And anyway, what I found out was when you troubleshoot an engine to check for your intake gaskets to see if they're leaking, the one way I do it is I spray carburetor cleaner around the gasket surface between the intake and the head while the engine's running, and if it speeds up, you know you're sucking vacuum from above. Unfortunately, that can't tell you if it's sucking it from the lifter valley, which that's what mine was doing. The way you check that is you disconnect a PCV valve from the valve cover that goes to the carburetor, and then you start the engine and you plug off that hole and put a vacuum pressure gauge on the other hole on the other valve cover, and in theory, if everything's working correctly, you should show pressure there. You should not show vacuum anymore because you had the PCV valve disconnected from it. On my engine, it showed a little bit of vacuum, and that's an indication that your intake gaskets are leaking underneath in the lifter valley area. So that's what I found out when I took them apart. The top half of the gaskets were really silicone stuck to the heads and the intake, and the bottom half was all oily and everything. It didn't appear like there was even any silicone on them, and with the oil getting under there, that's an indication that you're getting vacuum sucking through there. So anyway, after I got all done with this engine, putting the intake back on and everything, and I started it up, I checked my vacuum pressure again on the block, and I had actually 5 pounds of pressure. So that's showing me it's not sucking anymore through those gaskets. So that's definitely an indication that the gaskets were bad. Now I still have a miss in this engine, and I've got a video coming up that's going to explain that and show how I fixed that problem. And that was one of the major problems with this engine. It always had a weird miss, and going down the road at 70 miles an hour, you could feel a little bit of a miss in it. So anyway, that's coming up in a future video. So again, I apologize for the way this video ended. I hope the part that did turn out helps you with your problems if you have the same problem I have with my engine. But again, I apologize. So like I always say, if you like our videos, please hit like and subscribe, share them with a friend. If you have any comments, please leave them below. I really do appreciate the comments. I try to answer every comment that comes in. Sometimes I forget to check them for a while, but I will check them and answer them. And I can always say, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next video.